Okay, so welcome to theme 2 of GCSE Geography. This is lesson 1 of theme 2. So whereas theme 1 was quite physical geography based, looking a lot at natural, rivers, coastlines, things like that, this is going to move more into looking at the human geography side of things. So we're going to be opening with lesson 1, which is the links between the urban and rural areas, and we're going to use Swansea as an example because it's local to us, so we can relate to it. Urban means built up or developed, rural means countryside. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is look at where are people, how are people spread out across Wales, and to do that we're going to construct a choropleth map. Now I'll talk to you about what a choropleth map actually is in a moment. From that choropleth map we're going to identify population distribution and population density. What we'll then do is within areas of high population density, so an urban area, a city like Swansea, we will identify the characteristics of different zones of that urban area. The zones are called the Burgess model, and then we'll look at whether or not Swansea actually fits this model perfectly, and if not, give reasons for why not. Okay, so if you'd like to pause the video here a moment and go ahead and write down the title into your books, Links Between the Urban and Rural Areas in Swansea. Okay, so we're going to look on a national scale first of all at the whole of Wales. So, population density and distribution in Wales. We're going to look at what these two terms actually mean first off. Okay, the population density, it's the average number of people found in a square unit of land. So it could be the average number of people per square kilometre, the average number of people per square metre. So you take the number of people in an area and you divide it by the size of the area to give an average figure. If an area has a low population density through to a high population density, it's basically a better way of saying that there's not many people there, or there's a lot of people really crowded there. Population distribution is, well, where are the areas of high density and where are the areas of low density? So how are people spread out? What's the pattern of how people are spread out across Wales? Pause the video here a moment. Go ahead and write down the definition of population density and the definition of population distribution, please. If you want to draw these little boxes as an illustration to help you remember what we mean, then go ahead and do so. But definitely I want this definition and this definition, please. Okay, so the next task we're going to do, in one of the handouts, I think it's the Word resource that is attached to this lesson, you've got this map. Okay, you've got this map of Wales. Now the map is split into the different areas, the different counties if you like. So we've got Swansea here, we've got Cardiff and Newport down here, and so on. Now then, you'll notice that each of these areas has a number within it. That number links to a table that I'm about to show you. You'll also notice there's a key down here. Now we are going to put colours in this key and work out what colour to colour each area in Wales. And what it will end up showing us is where the most crowded areas are and least crowded areas are, and therefore it will reveal the pattern of how people are spread out across Wales. It will tell us the distribution. Okay? So, I'm hoping you're able to print out this map at home. If not, then you're actually going to have to skip this task. Okay? So what I'd like you to do is print out this map, and once you've got it in front of you, we're going to create a choropleth map. Now what is important about a choropleth map is that you use shades of the same colour. Because a choropleth map shows you how something is spread out, they use colour to show that pattern through light to dark. The lightest areas are the least of something, through to the darkest areas are the most of something. So you'll notice in my key I'm going to use blue. If there is less than one person per square kilometre in an area of Wales, I'll leave it white. If there's between 1 and 4 people per square kilometre in one of these areas, I'm going to colour it light blue. And if there are more than 4 people per square kilometre in an area of Wales, then I will colour it dark blue. To decide what colour to colour each area, I'm going to use this data. Now I'm only actually going to use 2 columns on this data, this one and this one. This one tells you the number on the map. Okay, so number 1 is Cardiff. Number 2 is Newport. These numbers do not tell you the colour. They just tell you the name of that area. What they've done in this column for you is they've taken the number of people and divided it by the area to give you the population density. So in Cardiff, on average, per square kilometre, there are 22 people. In Monmouthshire, on average, per square kilometre, there's 0.98 people per square kilometre. Now, it doesn't mean that there's like a person wandering around somewhere missing an arm, okay? It's because it's an average figure. So say, for example, you had 10 people in an area that was 3 kilometres squared. 10 divided by 3 makes 3.33333, yeah? It doesn't mean that you've got 3 1/3 people. It's because it's an average figure. So anyway, what you need to do, step 1, choose your colour. You could use just one pencil, to be honest. Press medium, press hard, or press light, press hard. So you could have light red or a pink and a red. You could do light blue and dark blue like I'm doing, light green and dark green, whatever you want, but it must be shades of the same colour. You then look at the area on the map, in any order you like really, but I'd suggest going chronologically. So number 1 is Cardiff. Cardiff has 22 people per square kilometre. According to my key, what colour am I going to colour Cardiff? 22 is more than 4, so number 1 will be dark blue. Number 2, Newport, 7.19 people per square kilometre. That's still more than 4, so number 2 on my map is going to go dark blue as well. If I skip down to give you an example to Neath, number 11, Neath has 3.16 people per square kilometre. So that is between 1 and 4. So I would colour number 11 medium blue. All the way down, say with number 20, Anglesey, that's less than 1 person per square kilometre. So I'd leave Anglesey white. Okay? So go ahead and pause the video with your chosen colour. Use this data table to colour the high, medium and low density population areas of Wales. Okay, now that you've done that, we're going to analyse the pattern that the map has shown you. And this is why choropleth maps are useful, is because of the light and dark element. Now, you might have slightly different to me. I can't remember if I coloured this properly or not. But you will have found that the vast majority of central Wales is left white. You've got a patch of moderate population density in the northeast and mostly high population density in the south and southeast. Okay? So, describe and explain the population distribution. Say where the areas of high and low are and why you think those areas have high and low. So for example, the areas of Wales that have the highest density population are the southeast and the south and maybe a little bit in the northeast, but mostly the south and southeast. I think this is because, now, think a minute, Swansea, Cardiff, Newport, why do these areas have so many people in them? Think back 200 years ago, maybe 300 years ago. Why did these cities grow so big in the first place? There was coal in the area, there was copper ore in the area, there was iron ore in the area, and you're on the coastline. So through the Industrial Revolution, we were trading copper, iron, limestone, coal in and out of the south coast of Wales. At one point, we had the largest copper factory in the world, and we were producing half the world's copper in Swansea. So that created a lot of jobs, and people flocked to the south coast of Wales. So the areas of Wales that have the highest population density are the south and southeast. I think this is because this is where a lot of the raw materials were that kick-started a lot of the industry, e.g. coal, iron and copper, plus being on the coastline meant it was easy to ship these things in and out, to trade with the rest of the world. That trade and those resources meant jobs, and where there's jobs, there's money, so more people move there. Conversely, the areas of Wales that have the lowest population density, central and western Wales, there's hardly anyone here. Think about physical geography. Why is there nobody living in mid-Wales, or very few people living here? What would make it difficult to live here? Yeah, you've got a mountain range running up here. You've got the Brecon Beacons here. You've got the Cambrian Mountains here. You've got Snowdon up here. Mountainous relief is difficult to build on, it's cold and wet to live on, and it's difficult to farm on. So nobody wants to live there. The areas of Wales that have the lowest population density are mid and far west Wales. I think this is because mid Wales is very mountainous, which means it's hard to build on and it's hard to farm on. And the climate tends to be wetter and colder as well. So pause the video here a moment, re-listen to what I've just said if you need to, but I want you to describe and explain. What do you see and why is it like that? The population density across Wales. Okay, so now that we've established where the people are in Wales, we're going to focus in on Swansea in particular. Okay, now as we can see, Swansea has a high population density. There's a lot of people living here. So over the time, the city of Swansea has grown outwards from the docks, from what is now the marina and the SA1, where all our industry used to be, all our copper industry, down near Morva as well, where the Liberty Stadium is now. You can actually see the old chimneys from the copper industry there. So that was sort of why Swansea started to grow in the first place. Those areas now are known as the CBD, the Central Business District, the very centre of Swansea. This isn't a photo of Swansea, but to illustrate what the city centre looks like now. In the majority of large cities, you've got high-rise buildings, high-end apartments, office space, banks, pubs, bars, clubs, restaurants. This is the beating heart of your city, the CBD, the Central Business District. If you move outwards a little bit from that, you've got what's called the inner city zone. This was originally where everyone flocking to the docks, you needed houses very quickly to put all those dock workers in. So you built very tightly packed, very cheaply built terraced housing. And the roads weren't very wide at that time either, because nobody had cars in the 17 and 1800s when the Industrial Revolution was going on. Everyone was horse and cart or walking. So it's quite narrow streets, terraced houses, quite overcrowded inner city areas just outside your central business district. If you step a bit further out again though, you come to the suburbs. And these tend to be slightly newer areas. Maybe the last 100 years or so, you've got bigger houses, some driveway parking, wider streets creeping in. And then outside of that, you start to leave the city and move into the countryside. And we call that the urban-rural fringe, the edge of the urban area moving into the rural area. What we're going to look at is the first person to identify that cities tend to have these zones and that they grow outwards, creating these zones from a central area, was a guy whose surname was Burgess. So the model of the growth of a city, we call it the Burgess model. Okay? And it literally looks like this. It's concentric, one outside the other, concentric rings of what becomes the city centre, but originally would have been some form of industry that is now your CBD, followed by your inner city, where your dock workers were living, and then your inner and outer suburbs, and then the very edge of the city before you spill into the countryside. What we're going to look at now is the features of each of these areas. Okay, so you can see I've done the CBD here for us, so you can get an idea of how I want you to lay it out. What I'd like you to do is, what I suggest is taking a double page in your books, so you've got plenty of space. In the middle, draw this kind of target-looking Burgess model, and then on the right-hand page, split it in two. So we've got a quarter section for the CBD and a quarter section for the urban-rural fringe. And then on the left-hand page of your double, again, split it in two. So we've got a quarter for the inner city notes and a quarter for our suburban notes. Okay, so pause the video here a minute. Go ahead and set out your double page so it looks like this. Now you do have these images to accompany it as well if you wish to print those out and put those in just to help you visualize what we're about to talk about. So go ahead, pause the video, make your double page in your book look just like this does, and then we'll talk about these other zones together, working our way outwards through the zones of the Burgess model. Okay, go ahead and do that now, please. Okay, so if we look at the CBD first of all, The central business district is the very beating heart of your city centre. It has mostly high-rise buildings in it, and most of those high-rise buildings are either high-end apartments or they're high-end office spaces for professional level jobs. You'll also find most of your shops and things here as well, and the people that tend to live here are your high-paid professionals, people that have maybe just left university or are just starting quite high-qualified, high-powered careers, which means that they're on plenty of money and can afford the high-end posh apartments in this zone. You've got excellent public transport links, so in fact the fact that there's very little parking because it's such a crowded zone doesn't really bother anyone too much. You've got regular buses, regular trains, lots of services running, and it's your kind of young, hip lifestyle, happy hour bars, pubs, clubs, restaurants. It's very much the beating heart vibe centre of your Burgess model, of your urban area. So you should have those bullet points down already, and what we're going to work through now is the other areas. We're going to start from the inside and work our way out, listing the main characteristics of each zone and identifying how the zones change as we go. So if we go to the inner city first, okay? Your inner city, housing type tends to be terraced, like we said, and the people that are living here are your ex-dock workers, and it tends to be your low-paid workers or low-income families or unemployed that live in this zone because it's actually the cheapest zone to live in these days. The houses tend to be smaller, it tends to feel quite cramped and overcrowded. In terms of jobs, low-skilled, low-paid, sometimes high levels of unemployment in this area. You're lucky to get a garden. If you have, it's probably pretty small. There may be some limited on-road parking, but remember, the whole reason this zone was built in the first place was to house the dock workers back during the Industrial Revolution. So people didn't have cars back then, which means that a lot of the roads aren't wide enough for parking. This one actually can just about get away with it. But it's quite overcrowded, limited parking, certainly no room for garages or driveways. Other factors, people working in the CBD either live in the CBD or they've earned enough money to buy a nice house in the suburbs, but they still work in the CBD. So to get to work each day, to commute to work, they drive through the inner city. And look at the width of these streets. You're going to get all that traffic coming through every day during rush hour. It's going to create an absolute nightmare, and it creates what we call congestion. That's the proper word for a traffic jam now. Okay? Traffic congestion means noise and air pollution. So if you've got respiratory issues, that's going to affect your breathing with all the air pollution. Trying to get your family to sleep at night, all the noise pollution, it's going to make you very stressed and possibly unhealthy. So that's going to affect your quality of life. Because of the income levels and the unemployment levels in this zone, the crime rate is often quite high, it's overcrowded, and because people don't have much money, it's often quite run down in this zone as well. So pause the video here a moment and make a bullet point list of the main characteristics of the inner city into your section on your double page. Okay, the next zone out is your suburbs. These start to look very different. There should be... Okay, it's just gone in backwards order. So the suburbs, this tends to have been built later during the development of a city. It tends to have been built for people on higher income. So the houses are bigger, there's more space, there's more gardens. You're moving now into semi-detached with some detached. Some driveways, maybe even some garages, so you don't have to park on the street all the time. The house price here does start increasing to reflect the fact that you're living in a nicer area and your house is bigger. So the people that you tend to have living here are quite young professional families. People that were in the CBD as young, single, newly graduated professionals, and maybe they want to start a family now, but not in the CBD, there's not enough space, so they move out to the suburbs. They can afford the cost of living because they've still got their high-paid job in the CBD. So you can notice there, moderate to well-paid, usually professional level jobs. Gardens start to get a bit bigger, parking starts to get a bit more accessible, and you start getting other things creeping in, like leisure centres, good schools. Maybe there might be like a skate park and things like that here. The crime rate is much lower, and in general the quality of life is higher. Now, as I'm going through these zones, don't form in your head a stigma or a stereotype that all people in the inner city are unemployed. or committing crime, or all people in the suburbs, or you have to have a professional level job to afford life in the suburbs. We're just talking about main characteristics. This is the rule. There are exceptions to the rule. Okay, so pause the video here a minute and go ahead and bullet point the main features of the inner and outer suburban area into your section on your double page. Okay, finally, your urban-rural fringe. Again, it looks like it's going to go backwards, and the picture will come up last. This is the edge of the developed, built-up city area. You're moving into the countryside. That's why it's called the urban-to-rural fringe. Fringe meaning on the edge. What you have here is detached houses and farms. It's by far the most expensive zone of the Burgess model to live in. Okay, depending obviously on if you're going for a penthouse apartment in the CBD, it might rival the cost of maybe a 3-bed detached small holding in the urban rural fringe. But as a rule, you're getting much more space, bigger houses, so it's going to be more expensive. Therefore, the people that are living here are established professional working families that probably still work in the CBD and commute back and forth every day. But then you've also got farmers and retired people. So it's quite a strange mix of people living in the urban-rural fringe, and that can cause quite a lot of arguments and conflict that we'll come on to later. Your gardens now are massive. You might even live on a farm, and in which case you've got lots of land. There's plenty of space for driveways and garages, and the crime rate here is little to none, very quiet and peaceful, but you can feel quite isolated because the buses don't run very often out here. Mobile phone signal, internet signal can be very poor, so you might sometimes feel a little bit cut off, even though you've got this lovely, beautiful rural setting that you're living in. So pause the video here a moment and go ahead and make a list of the main characteristics of this final zone. Okay, so what we're going to just look at is, depending on what zone you're in, what issues might you face, okay? So, put a subheading, issues in different zones of the Burgess model. And we're going to discuss what issues you might face if you live in the CBD, what issues you'd face if you live in the inner city, and what issues you'd face in the urban-rural fringe, okay? So, think about if you lived in the city centre. You might have a nice posh apartment to go with your high-paid job and your professional lifestyle. But you're also living in the most social zone, if you like. So think of Wine Street in Swansea, for example. There's going to be quite a lot of antisocial behaviour on student nights, on the weekends. That could increase the crime rate. That might stress you out, might lower your quality of life. There's also a lot of traffic congestion in the CBD. People coming back and forth to their high-paid jobs every day. That's going to cause air and noise pollution. It's going to lower your quality of life. Okay. In the inner city, we've touched on this a little bit. The narrow streets mean commuters travelling through to the CBD jobs. You're going to get a lot of traffic congestion. And it tends to be the poorest, most run-down zone as well. So you might think, well, the countryside is the solution. Let's all move out to the countryside, get a little chocolate box traditional stone-built cottage, get a few chickens. Yes, the rural idyll and that idea is great, but it can feel very isolated if you move quite far out into the rural area. Buses don't run very often, so if you don't drive, if you're elderly or you're a teenager, you can't get into town, you can't see your friends, you're going to feel quite isolated. And there's poor communication links as well. Mobile phone and internet signal can be very poor out there. So if you're trying to run a business from home or trying to return work emails, that's going to be impacted because you can't get online. And as a teenager, of course, you're going to feel very isolated if you haven't got any mobile phone signal. So go ahead, pause the video and write these down into your book quickly, please. All right, the final thing that we're going to discuss is, obviously, we've been saying that according to Burgess, urban areas grow outwards in a pattern of circles. Well, has Swansea actually done this? If it has, why has it? If it hasn't, why hasn't it? So if we take a look at a Google Earth screenshot of Swansea from above, I'll just race through all these again. Okay, so here's a Google Earth screenshot of Swansea. What you've got here to give you your bearings is, here's the coastline, here's Swansea Bay. Okay, so all of this is water out here. Here's what was the docks. We would have had huge ships coming in and out of here, trading our copper and all our heavy industry during the Industrial Revolution. This is now what we know as the marina and SA1. Okay, and the new university development down here. You've got the River Towie running down here, out into Swansea Bay. You've got, let me get this the right way around, Kilvey Hill and May Hill. There's your city centre, that's the quadrant. Alright, there's the old Vetch playing field. So this is St Thomas. There's your city centre. This then is like sandfields, and then you've got kind of uplands here going out that way further. And if you followed this road down here, you'd get to Mumbles. So can we identify any of the zones of the Burgess model on this map? Well, yes we can. So here's your city centre. This would be your CBD. And what we've now regenerated with the new university and all the restaurants and stuff down the marina, our CBD kind of spreads all the way around here. Now then, the inner city with its terraced houses and skinny streets, that's quite an easy pattern to spot. You've got this like gridwork, quite rigid rectangular gridwork pattern that indicates it's the inner city. So we've got an inner city area here, St Thomas. We've got an inner city area here. This is all quite rigid gridwork here and here. But then all of a sudden it gets very windy, which is more indicative of suburbs. You've got more space, and you can see more green areas here too. Larger gardens, larger open spaces. And then over here, there's nothing. It's agricultural patchwork fields. So, do we have the zones? Yes. We've got a CBD. We've got a bit of inner city here, and a bit of inner city here and here. And we've got some suburbs up here, and we've got some urban-rural fringe here. So we have the zones, but it's definitely not in a concentric circular pattern like the target of the Burgess model. Why not? Why hasn't it grown in perfect circles? What's in the way? Well, to start with, Swansea Bay. You couldn't carry on developing out this way. Secondly, the River Towie. It's difficult to build across when there's a river in the way. Thirdly, Swansea's relief, the shape of our land. It's quite mountainous here, and it's really mountainous on Kilvey Hill, which makes it very difficult to build on. So, you've got the satellite image in your handout. If you're able to print it out, and you're able to take some colours over the top of it, then by all means please go ahead and do so. So I'd like you to print it out. I've used yellow for CBD, blue for inner city, green for suburbs, and I haven't actually put the urban-rural fringe on. But if you're able to print it out and use some colours, make your map look like this map, stick it in and create a little key. Yellow, CBD, blue, inner city, green, suburbs. It doesn't matter if you use different colours to mine though. So if you're able to do that, pause the video here and do that briefly please. If you're not, don't stress about it. And then what I'd like you to do is we're going to write a short description. So the last part of our aim was to analyse whether Swansea fits the Burgess model or not. Well, yes it does. Sorry, I thought I had a writing frame. Yes it does. We do have the zones, but they are not in the circular pattern. Because, firstly, Swansea Bay stopped it expanding to the south. The River Towie also stopped it expanding in a circular pattern because rivers are difficult to build around. Finally, the mountainous relief of Kilvey Hill made that area very difficult to build on, so it couldn't expand further that way in the circular pattern. So 2 jobs to finish off then. Firstly, if you can print it out and stick it in and make it look like this with the zones on, go ahead and do so. If you can't, don't worry. But then all of you write a couple of sentences. Does Swansea fit the model? Yes it does, we do have the zones. But they're not in the circular pattern because Swansea Bay, River Towie, Kilvey Hill. A little mini paragraph please. And then that is lesson 1 done and dusted. So we're off and running with theme 2. We'll move on to lesson 2 next time, where we start to explore the links between the urban and rural areas in a little bit more depth. If you have any questions or queries, as usual, please feel free to email me, gleesona@hubecymru.net. I've got my emails open every day, so I'll be able to get right back to you.